You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and be sure to smash that like button. Earlier in the spring, in a very surprising move, Jamar Cain left LSU after just 1 year as defensive line coach. You know that. He took a job on Sean Payton's staff as the new Broncos defensive line coach. It was surprising. My understanding is something along the lines of Jamar Cain's trying to figure out if he wants to be an NFL coach or maybe keep progressing toward being a college head coach. Well, ultimately made that decision very, very surprisingly. It wasn't necessarily looking for a move, but of course, Bo Lowry, who was on LSU's staff, Sean Payton, he had been with the Saints. Sean Payton hired Bo away from LSU. Bo really stumped for Jamar Cain. They bring him there. They offer him the job, and of course, he takes it. So it left LSU in a little bit of a lurch. Jamar wasn't looking to leave, and I don't think LSU was looking for him to leave, but sometimes situations happen in this very transient profession. So when the Jamar Cain news broke, this is what Brian Kelly said they were looking for in a new defensive line coach.
I think if you would just look at assembling a staff in the SEC, look at the position groups that make, such an important impact on your team. And I mean, you'd hard pressed to say that the defensive line is not as important as any position. So, recruiter and talent developing is got to be at the top of the list. So the ability to recruit in the SEC and develop talent is got to be 1A, 1B. So, what does that mean? I mean, I think it narrows your pool, from that perspective. Experience then comes into being part of that, right? You can't be an inexperienced, never been in the SEC or knows the recruiting of this landscape and be a qualified candidate.
That is a very, very specific description. When you say you have to have been in the SEC, that's not, look, I mean, you've got 14 teams in the SEC, and all of them have defensive line coaches, and some have turned over and over a lot of years, but that also eliminates a great number of potential coaches if you're only looking at guys that have coached defensive line in the SEC. Again, that is not in any way a criticism. That's a man who knows what he wants and is going to get it, and went and got it. So today, news is breaking. Football Scoop had it first. Everyone's had it since. Jimmy Lindsey is going to be LSU's new defensive line coach. I'll give you a little bit of the background on Jimmy Lindsey. He spent the last 2 years at South Carolina under Shane Beamer. So check the box there on your SEC criteria mandate from Brian Kelly. Played collegiately at Chattanooga in the late 90s and started his career at Chattanooga as a grad assistant, then coached linebackers, and he's bounced around. After Chattanooga, he went to Gardner-Webb, and this is where it's interesting because during his time at Gardner-Webb, he overlapped with LSU defensive coordinator Matt House. So the coaching profession is very incestuous. We talk about it all the time. The way that it's so transient, as much as guys move around, you come across a lot of coaches on these deep staffs. And some point in your past, a lot of times you worked with or against a guy, and you can kind of look at Brian Kelly's staff and see what he's doing. Brian Kelly and Mike Denbrock have known each other since the 1980s. You could look at John Jancic, who was just promoted from an analyst to the outside linebackers coach and special teams coordinator. John Jancic and Brian Kelly have known each other since the 1980s. Like, these are guys that have been familiar with each other for a long time. So you have even now that familiarity with Matt House and Jimmy Lindsey, who also coached at Miami of Ohio, Tennessee Martin, back to Chattanooga as a defensive line coach, Furman as the defensive line coach, Georgia Southern for a year as defensive line coach, Western Kentucky as a defensive line coach, Illinois coaching defensive ends for 1 year during the COVID season, and then the last 2 years at South Carolina. So you have a guy that has moved all over this region. Chattanooga, Gardner-Webb, Miami of Ohio, UT Martin, Furman, Georgia Southern, Western Kentucky, Illinois, and South Carolina. 9 different programs he's worked for. 8 of the 9 are in this region. I guess 7 of the 9. Miami of Ohio and Illinois or would be the only others. He's been in Georgia. He's been in Tennessee. He has been now in Louisiana. He is certainly qualified for a guy who understands the region, who's coached in the conference, who is known as a really good recruiter and a developer of talent. As a matter of fact, I called a couple of buddies today who cover South Carolina to say, hey, give me your take on Jimmy Lindsey. I'll tell you, I won't necessarily share this person's name because I asked off the record, but this is the text I got in response about Jimmy Lindsey. Great guy. The kids love him, and the guys got better. Noted also he's a really good food guy, loves to cook smoked meats. Good get for LSU. So apparently Jimmy Lindsey knows his way around the grill and the pit as well, which is awesome to see. But when you're Brian Kelly and you said you had 3 real criteria, can he recruit? Well, kids love him. That's a big part of that. So that's one, yes. Can he develop talent? Kids got better. I mean, the only really well-known, named player that Lindsey had would have been Jordan Birch. But when you look beyond that and you look at guys like Alex Huntley, Zach Pickens, who, if I remember correctly, wore one of those weird single-digit numbers when he was a defensive lineman at South Carolina. Or maybe I'm making that up. But anyway, the point is they got better. He took guys that, aside from Birch, that weren't necessarily top-flight 5-star recruits and made them better over the last 2 seasons. So he can recruit, he can develop, and then does he have SEC experience? Check the box. So Jimmy Lindsey checks all 3 boxes that Brian Kelly was looking for. The one thing I will be interested to see when we get the contract or the terms of it, and listen, I know we talk about contracts often, but I always say it ain't your money, so it doesn't really matter. Someone else is paying this, and as long as you can go get the people to pay what you need to get who you need, you get it. But Lindsey got a 1-year contract extension in January, raising his salary from $375 to $475. So he was going to make $475 this year. By comparison, Jamar Cain was making $850. Okay, so he's going to get a significant raise from whatever he was making at South Carolina, from what he was making at South Carolina. But the kicker is, because he's leaving 1 year within that deal, he owes South Carolina $300,000. So LSU is going to have to pay, very likely here, $300,000 of a buyout to get Jimmy Lindsey, and then the contract they're going to pay him on top. So maybe it's one of those things where he's not going to make $850 like Jamar Cain was. We'll see what the number is, but that's probably how they make the money work. He's going to get a raise, but even in getting more money than he was making at South Carolina, maybe he's making less than what Jamar Cain was, which will mitigate the buyout that LSU is going to have to pay to get Jimmy Lindsey out of the South Carolina contract. So just some kind of housekeeping is just sort of dot the I's and cross the T's, how a lot of that works. One other thing worth keeping an eye on is what is Jimmy Lindsey's ultimate career goal. And you never hire with fear of losing someone. You always hire great assistants. You hire great assistants understanding great assistants may leave you. And this is something Brian Kelly's done throughout his career, in particular at Notre Dame, that we mentioned when we talk about Brian Kelly hiring. If it was Mike Elko or Brian Van Gorder was sort of the one-off. Bob Diaco, who's now back on staff at LSU, Marcus Freeman. Brian Kelly has hired defensive coordinators who ultimately went on to get head coaching jobs. He's done a great job of identifying and hiring defensive coordinator talent during his time at Notre Dame, and clearly he's done it again with Matt House. But my point is, you don't hire out of fear of losing someone. You hire great coaches, and you want them to leave because it means they did a great job here, and then you just have confidence you're going to be able to hire the next great one. So I bring all that up because Jimmy Lindsey has done 4 NFL minority internships. 2006 with the Browns, 2008 with the Lions, 2010 with Denver, and 2013 with the Chargers. Now, that's been a decade, so maybe it's a situation where he is settled and content being a college football coach. Maybe he knows this is where he wants to be, but he has dipped his toe in the NFL water 4 different times, so just something worth keeping an eye on. It's hard to imagine losing a coach to another college job because LSU's always going to be able to pay competitively another college position coaching job because LSU's always going to be able to pay competitively. If he gets a DC job somewhere, you totally understand it, but the NFL might even be a bigger risk for Jimmy Lindsey. Just something worth filing away, but in the meantime, Brian Kelly had a very specific set of criteria. He checked all of those boxes with Jimmy Lindsey, who we expect is going to be introduced as the new defensive line coach for LSU, replacing Jamar Cain, who was at LSU for just 1 season. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.